It was late, later than I should have stayed at work. The office was dead quiet, just the hum of my computer and the occasional clatter of my keyboard. When I finally looked up, the clock read 11:45 p.m. I groaned, rubbing my eyes. My boss had dumped a last-minute project on me and I didn't want to leave it unfinished. But now, with the building almost empty, I felt the weight of the silence pressing down on me. The parking garage was always eerie at night, but tonight something felt off. As I walked toward the elevator, the fluorescent lights above flickered faintly. I told myself it was just my imagination. It had been a long day after all. The elevator ride down was uneventful, save for the low hum of machinery and the faint buzz of the overhead light. But when the doors opened, the chill of the garage hit me immediately, the kind that wasn't from the cold, but from the emptiness. I stepped out, the soles of my shoes echoing across the concrete floor. My car was parked on the far side near the dimly lit exit. The garage stretched out in all directions, rows of cars casting long, jagged shadows under the faint light. At first I thought I was alone. Then I heard it, a faint click of footsteps. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. My first instinct was to brush it off. Maybe it was another late worker heading to their car, but when I turned around there was no one there. The footsteps stopped too. I swallowed hard, my keys clutched in one hand as I started walking again, faster this time. The sound of my own footsteps seemed deafening in the quiet. Then the footsteps returned, faint but deliberate. They matched my pace, stopping when I stopped. I spun around, scanning the dimly lit space. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing across the garage. Nothing. The sound of my heartbeat thudded in my ears as I resumed walking, my pace quicker now. I could see my car up ahead, a silver sedan, parked in the same spot it had been since morning. I reached into my bag for my phone. No service. Figures. The reception in the garage was always terrible. As I approached my car, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow just beyond the last row of cars. My head snapped toward it, but all I saw was darkness. "Stop freaking out," I muttered to myself. I clicked the unlock button on my key fob, the car's lights flashing. The sound felt too loud, too revealing in the silent expanse of the garage. I reached the driver's side door, fumbling with the handle as the footsteps grew louder. Not faint anymore, closer. I whipped around, my back against the car. The garage was empty as far as I could see, but the shadows felt like they were moving, pressing in from the edges of the light. My hands were shaking as I yanked the door open and slid inside, locking it immediately. I gripped the steering wheel, my breath coming in quick gasps. And then it happened, a loud bang on the window, inches from my face. I screamed, instinctively ducking down. My heart felt like it was going to explode. When I looked up, there was nothing there, just the faint outline of a handprint on the glass. But I wasn't imagining it. Someone was out there. I sat frozen in the car, my pulse hammering in my ears. My eyes darted around the parking garage, scanning every shadow, every corner. The handprint on the window began to fade, smudged by the humidity inside the car. Whoever, or whatever, had banged on the glass was gone. But I wasn't alone. The quiet was deafening now, broken only by the faint hum of distant pipes and the low thrum of the storm outside. I reached for my phone again, praying for a single bar of service. Nothing. The car lights dimmed as I turned off the engine to avoid drawing more attention. My hands shook as I fumbled to retrieve the flashlight from the glove box. It wasn't much, but it made me feel like I had some control. That's when I heard it again, the footsteps. Closer this time, deliberate and heavy, moving toward me from the far side of the garage. I held my breath, clutching the flashlight so tightly my knuckles ached. The steps stopped directly behind my car. The air felt suffocating, thick with tension. My mind raced with options. Do I stay and hope they leave? Do I make a run for the garage exit? Every decision felt like it would cost me precious seconds. Then came the sound of metal scraping against metal. My heart dropped. It wasn't just footsteps. They were dragging something heavy. I flipped on the flashlight, pointing it toward the rearview mirror, trying to see behind me. The beam wavered as my hands trembled. For a split second, I caught the edge of a shadow moving along the side of the car. It was all the incentive I needed. I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed up wildly. A figure darted to the side, avoiding the car by inches. My headlights caught them. A tall, wiry man in dark clothes, his face obscured by a hood. My heart pounded as I put the car into drive and sped toward the exit. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see him running after me. He wasn't. He stood there in the middle of the garage watching me go, his outline barely visible in the dim light. I made it to the main road, pulling into a gas station a few blocks away. My hands were still shaking as I dialed 911. The dispatcher's calm voice was a stark contrast to the panic that gripped me. "Someone was in the parking garage," I blurted out. "They banged on my car window. They followed me. Please send someone." The police arrived quickly, meeting me at the gas station. I explained everything, pointing out the smudged handprint still visible on my window. They searched the garage but found no one, except for my car. Deep scratches ran along the driver's side, marks that hadn't been there when I parked earlier. The officers assured me they'd investigate, but their skeptical look said enough. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside my apartment made me jump. I couldn't shake the image of that shadowy figure standing in the garage, the memory of their deliberate movements, their refusal to run. A week later, the police called me back. They had reviewed the garage's security footage. "Did you see him?" I asked, my voice trembling. There was a long pause on the other end. "The cameras didn't capture anything. No one was near your car. No one left the garage." My stomach sank. I wanted to argue, to tell them they were wrong, but the line went dead. To this day, I don't know who or what was in that garage with me. All I know is that every time I park somewhere at night, I lock my doors and keep my headlights on, and I never, ever linger. It was just past 3 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of rustling outside. At first I thought it was the wind, maybe some stray branches brushing against the house. But as I lay there, straining to listen, I realized it was coming from the backyard. My neighborhood is quiet, one of those suburbs where the biggest drama is whose dog keeps digging up whose lawn. So hearing anything unusual this late at night was rare and frankly unsettling. I rolled out of bed, slipping on a pair of old sneakers by the door. The room was still dark, the faint glow of the alarm clock casting long shadows. I grabbed my phone for the flashlight feature, but decided to reach for the actual flashlight from the kitchen drawer instead. It just felt sturdier. The house creaked as I moved through it, the kind of sound that only seems loud when everything else is silent. I tried to stay calm, convincing myself it was just some animal, maybe a raccoon or stray cat rooting around for food. When I got to the back door, I hesitated. The motion-activated porch light had flickered on, spilling pale light over the yard. From the window, I could see the shed at the far end of the lawn. The door was shut, just as I had left it, but something moved near it, a shadow, quick and low to the ground. My breath caught and I instinctively flicked on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The shed stood silent, its old wooden frame warped from years of weather. I stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The grass was damp beneath my feet, and I could hear the faint hum of crickets in the distance. I swept the flashlight across the yard. A rake leaned against the side of the shed. The trash bins were tipped over, their lids ajar. I muttered under my breath, annoyed at the thought of having to clean up whatever mess the raccoons had made. But as I walked closer to the shed, the rustling stopped. I froze, the flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. The air felt heavier now, the kind of weight that makes your chest tighten without explanation. The shed door creaked. Not from the wind, there wasn't any. It was a deliberate, slow sound, like someone testing it from the other side. "Hello?" I called out, my voice stronger than I expected. No response. I took a step forward, then another, my heart pounding louder with each one. By the time I reached the door, I could feel my pulse in my ears. I reached out, gripping the rusty handle. The flashlight beam wavered as I pulled the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, it was pitch black. I shone the flashlight inside. The shed was empty, just as it should have been. My old tools were lined up neatly on the wall, a bag of fertilizer leaning against the corner. Nothing was out of place, but the floor was wet. Mud, fresh damp footprints, leading from the shed and heading toward the house. My stomach dropped. I whipped around, the flashlight beam darting across the yard. The back door was wide open. Someone was inside. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like my chest might burst. The back door was wide open, swaying slightly in the cool night breeze. Whoever had left those muddy footprints was now inside my house. I wanted to call the police, but my phone was still on the kitchen counter, just inside the door. The thought of walking into that darkened house, knowing someone else was in there, made my stomach churn. I gripped the flashlight tighter and crept toward the door. My sneakers squeaked faintly on the damp grass, and I cursed under my breath, wishing I could move more quietly. When I stepped inside, the air felt different, heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. The footprints led across the kitchen floor, smeared and uneven, heading toward the hallway. My phone sat right where I'd left it, on the edge of the counter. I reached for it, my hands trembling, and quickly dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, but mine was barely above a whisper. "There's someone in my house," I said, glancing toward the hallway. "They came in through the back door. I think they're still here." "Stay on the line," she said. "Are you in a safe location?" I didn't answer right away. My eyes were locked on the hallway. It was pitch black, the shadows stretching impossibly long from where the flashlight's beam barely reached. "I think they're in the hallway," I whispered. "Officers are on their way," she assured me. "Can you get somewhere safe? Lock yourself in a room if you can." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Slowly, I started backing away toward the living room. The mud trail continued into the hallway, disappearing into the shadows, and then I heard it, a soft creak, like a floorboard shifting under weight. My breath caught, and I froze. The sound came again, closer this time. I pointed the flashlight down the hallway, the beam shaking as I tried to steady my hand. For a split second I saw something, movement, a shadow darting into one of the rooms. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to hide anymore. I turned and ran into the living room, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it. My hands fumbled for anything I could use as a weapon. I grabbed the heavy metal lamp from the side table and stood by the door, waiting. The house was silent again, except for my ragged breathing. Then the doorknob jiggled. My grip tightened on the lamp as the door rattled harder. Whoever was out there was trying to get in. "Go away!" I shouted, my voice breaking. The rattling stopped. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then came the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving away from the door. I pressed my ear against the wood, trying to hear where they were going. My heart nearly stopped when I heard a loud crash from the kitchen. I flung the door open, gripping the lamp like a bat, and ran toward the sound. The back door was wide open again, swinging in the wind. I swept the flashlight across the yard, but there was no one there. The shed door was still open, the tools undisturbed. Blue and red lights suddenly flashed through the front windows. The police had arrived. They swept the house, finding no one. The muddy footprints stopped abruptly in the living room, as if whoever had been there had vanished into thin air. One officer pulled me aside. "It's possible they ran when they heard the sirens," he said, "but we'll stay in the area just in case." I nodded, but the explanation didn't sit right with me. The crash in the kitchen, the footprints that just stopped. None of it made sense. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every shift of the house made my heart race. I kept the flashlight and lamp beside me, my eyes fixed on the hallway. Days later I noticed something I'd missed before, a muddy handprint on the inside of the shed door, smudged and faint but unmistakable. Whoever had been there knew the house, knew the layout, and the thought that they might come back still keeps me up at night. Jogging at night had always been my way to clear my head. The neighborhood was quiet, the air cool, and the empty park trails were peaceful. But that night something felt different. The park was dimly lit by a few scattered streetlights, their glow barely reaching the winding paths. The swings at the small playground creaked softly in the breeze, or at least that's what I thought it was at first. As I jogged closer, I noticed one of the swings moving more than the others, back and forth like someone had just jumped off it. I slowed down, wiping the sweat from my forehead. The playground was empty as it always was this late at night. But the swing didn't stop. It kept moving, the chain groaning with each swing. I told myself it was the wind. The logical part of my brain kept repeating it. It's just the wind, nothing weird. But the air was still. I shook my head and kept jogging. My route took me along the tree line at the edge of the park, and as I passed the last streetlight, I glanced back at the playground. That's when I saw it. A figure. It was standing at the edge of the woods, partially hidden in the shadows. I couldn't make out any details, just that it was tall, broad-shouldered, and completely still. My pace slowed again, and I felt my pulse quicken. It was probably another jogger, I told myself, maybe someone cutting through the park. But something about the way they stood just outside the light made my skin crawl. I kept jogging, picking up the pace. My footsteps pounded against the pavement, and I tried to focus on the sound, anything to drown out the unease creeping up my spine. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. I glanced over my shoulder. The figure was walking now, emerging from the shadows of the trees. They weren't running, but their strides were long and deliberate, closing the distance between us. My throat tightened, and I picked up speed, my jog turning into a full sprint. My house wasn't far, just a few more blocks, but every step felt like an eternity. The footsteps behind me quickened. I didn't dare look back again. My breath was ragged and my legs burned as I pushed myself harder than I ever had. The sound of their steps echoed in my ears, growing louder, closer. Finally, I reached my street. My house was the third one down, and I fumbled for my keys in my pocket as I bolted toward the front door. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped them on the porch. The footsteps stopped. I froze, bending down to grab my keys. And that's when I felt it, the undeniable sensation of someone watching me. I whipped around, flashlight in hand, but the street was empty. The figure was gone. I didn't waste any more time. I shoved the key into the lock, threw the door open, and slammed it shut behind me, twisting the deadbolt. My heart was racing, my shirt soaked with sweat. Grabbing my phone, I dialed 911, pacing the living room as I explained what had happened. The operator assured me that officers were on their way, but the words didn't bring any comfort. Then came the sound of heavy thuds against the front door. The thudding against the door made my heart leap into my throat. It wasn't just knocking, it was forceful, deliberate, like someone trying to break it down. I clutched my phone tightly, still connected to the 911 operator. "He's at the door," I whispered, my voice barely steady. "He's trying to get in." "Stay calm," the operator said. "Officers are on their way. Is there somewhere safe you can go?" I glanced around the room, my eyes darting to the window. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint outline of someone standing outside, their shadow shifting with every impact against the door. I think he's trying to get in through the window," I hissed, backing away toward the hallway. The banging stopped. The sudden silence was worse. My ears strained for any sound, and my breathing felt deafening in the quiet. Then the window rattled. I spun around just in time to see the silhouette of a hand pressed against the glass. The figure was trying to lift it open. My hands trembled as I grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy vase from the table, and held it like a weapon. The window creaked, the lock straining under the pressure. "The window's not going to hold," I said into the phone, panic rising in my voice. "Officers are 1 minute out," the operator assured me. "Stay where you are." 1 minute felt like an eternity. The window lock snapped, and the figure began to push it open. Without thinking, I lunged forward, slamming the vase against the window frame. The sound shattered the silence, and the figure flinched, retreating slightly. But they didn't leave. Instead, they crouched low, their face still obscured by the shadows. My pulse was racing, my grip on the vase so tight my knuckles ached. Red and blue lights suddenly flashed outside, spilling across the walls of my living room. The figure froze for a moment before bolting toward the yard. I ran to the window, pulling the curtains aside just in time to see them disappear into the shadows at the edge of the park. The police arrived seconds later, their voices cutting through the night as they searched the area. 2 officers came to my door, and I unlocked it with trembling hands. "Are you okay?" one of them asked, scanning the room. I nodded, but my voice cracked when I spoke. He was trying to get in, through the door and the window." They checked the front door, the scuffed wood where it had been kicked, and the broken lock on the window. "Looks like he didn't get inside," the officer said, "but we'll sweep the area to be sure." Another officer approached, shaking his head. "No sign of him. He's gone." My stomach dropped. Gone? How could he just vanish? The officer shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Probably ran when he saw us coming." They stayed for a while, asking questions and patrolling the area, but there was nothing else to find. When they finally left, I locked every door and window in the house, double-checking each one twice. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching. Even now, I can't step into that park without looking over my shoulder. I don't jog at night anymore, and every time I hear the faint sound of footsteps behind me, my heart skips a beat. Whoever he was, he knew where I lived, and the thought of that still keeps me up at night.